nothing's ever going to be the exact same as it was, right? The people, the product, the service, the time, the external factors, you name it, right? I see founders, CEOs have when they're ready to do something and they think, oh, you got to go hire this person who has this exact track record one or two times, as if that's going to be the way that you de-risk whatever success you've already had. I think it's crap.
This is Mental Selling, the sales podcast for people who are dedicated to making a difference in customers' lives. We're here to help you unlock sales talent, win more relationships, and transform your business with integrity. I'm your host, Haley Parr. Let's get right into it. Welcome to the Mental Selling podcast, brought to you by Integrity Solutions, where we explore the mindset and skill set behind high-performance sales teams. Today, I'm excited to welcome Lindsay Rios, Fractional CRO at Luminetics and board advisor at Rework Training. Lindsay is a revenue leader known for building high-performing go-to-market engines, helping organizations scale with discipline, and aligning sales strategy with operational rigor. She's passionate about building teams that not only perform, but love what they do. In this episode, we're diving into what go-to-market done right actually looks like and why non-negotiables matter, how revenue operations and forecasting create confidence, not complexity, and why knowing your ICP from day one is critical if you want sustainable, recurring growth. This episode's all about clarity, focus, and building a revenue engine that works for the business and for the people inside of it. So let's get started. Lindsay, welcome. We're so excited to have you join us on Mental Selling. How are you?
Well, we had a little chit chat before. We're good.
Before we get started on our topic du jour, let the listeners know a little bit more about you and your journey. You've led revenue at multiple organizations. Now you're a fractional CRO. Talk to me a little bit about how you got here and the experiences that have shaped your philosophy around a disciplined go-to-market revenue strategy.
I actually think it's really important whenever you kind of hear someone's story, like, how did you get here? And I don't ever want it to be like over romanticized or like some, oh, well, I always wanted to own my own business and, and all of that. Like, no, I was a very happy W-2 revenue leader. I've always said I got really lucky. And when I figured out what was lucky and good about it, I've gotten intentional in every step of my career. But I was, having really awesome companies that I got to work with until one day, things happen. We all know how this economy's been going for some years now. And my role was made redundant very suddenly. And instead of just going back into another organization, I decided, I don't think I want to do that anymore. I've solved some of the same problems enough times that I feel like I would rather do this with many companies, and help them build revenue, what I say, on purpose. So no exceptional fancy story, but taking something that happened surprisingly and turning it into something else is really how I got here.
So you say build revenue on purpose as opposed to what?
I've been in early stage tech majority of my career, especially during the times of growth at all costs. And what I saw, not just at the orgs that I worked at, but ones around me, is not to take any skill set away from anyone, but there was a lot of kind of accidental growth that happened. Maybe you hit one good thing, like you found product market fit, which is no small feat. But from there, things kind of sometimes just took off. You found one great fit somewhere and then you just went with it. And when we had all this growth at all costs happening, and then we see these companies crumble, mass layoffs, big restructuring, all these changes, that tends to be a result from not everything was built from a foundation of intention. It's not that you could go back and explain how exactly did you do this? How did you get from X point to X, revenue? Tactically tell me everything you did step by step to do it. A lot of times you can't. You could say some of the things that you knew worked, but that 5X, crazy growth that we saw, if you really think that you could go back and say, I know every single thing that led to it, probably not, right? And so I had been affected by redundancies more than once in my career. loved ones, friends, like it's still happening to this day. And so that's why my approach was I would love to help organizations have more control over what's going to happen. One, so that they can have healthy revenue, even if it's not 5x in speed of growth, but also so that the people who work there can have a more stable life, right?
Yeah, it sounds like that was a early lesson that really shaped how you think about leadership in revenue. Is there something like a belief system or something that has evolved or changed since that point in time as a result of those early experiences?
One of the biggest things that changed for me some time ago, still when I was in a W-2 role, I kind of had bought for a while that notion of like, well, you have to hire someone who's done this before when you're ready to maybe scale or go to the next supposed milestone, right? So a lot of times it's like, get us from 0 to 1. And then it turns out, okay, now we need someone who can really scale us to 10 million. But then from there, that 10 to 25 and on, like, oh, well, now we need a different person. So I used to buy that, like, oh, so if I wasn't that person, I would understand why someone else would now come in. Or if I was interviewing somewhere, like why I couldn't be qualified, right? If I hadn't done that exact journey before. And at some point I realized that's a bunch of crap. And in fact, where my quote unquote hot take comes in is I actually find that to be an insanely risky assumption. That if you hire someone who's done this exact journey before, that they can come in and do that for you, because nothing's ever going to be the exact same as it was, right? The people, the product, the service, the time, the external factors, you name it, right? So there's this overconfidence that I see founders, CEOs have when they're ready to do something and they think, oh, and boards, oh, they do this. They're like the worst about it. Oh, you got to go hire this person who has this exact track record 1 or 2 times, as if that's going to be the way that you de-risk to continue, maybe whatever success you've already had. So I'm pretty bullish about that, what I call founder myth these days. And I think it's crap.
I think this parlays really well into something I want to chat with you about, and that's just the go-to-market done right mentality in general. And because you've done the work to move beyond just the luck of hitting the right product market fit and actually operationalizing the steps it took to get there, you can bring to an organization a strategy and a plan that has discipline to it. You work with organizations at various critical inflection points where they really need clarity, they need consistency. When you're walking in as fractional CRO, what are some of those signs that there might be an alignment issue? Where are some of those breakdowns that you see?
I like to call it the kids are fighting. Usually one of the easiest symptoms of that is, when I say this phrase and you see a lot of people nod their heads yes. Basically what happens is marketing complains that salespeople don't follow up with any of the leads that they create. And sales teams say, marketing creates crappy leads. They're not good. And then customer success is like, dude, sales just keeps closing all the wrong people, right? And then everybody's mad at product because they're all like, you're not making anything that any of us want. That classic, everyone's not happy about what the other person's doing is the telltale symptom that everything's off, right? And it could be just a smidgen off, each department, but there's no aligned, purposeful go-to-market strategy that they're all working towards.
To your point, not every single one of those all at once. There's probably a little bit of that rings true for a lot of our listeners. Those are some pretty common scenarios with the various departments that are involved in a go-to-market strategy. One of the things that you and I talked about were some non-negotiables in go-to-market. Tell me a little bit more about what that means to you.
I'm always a huge mixture of quality and quantity. In fact, I had done this personality assessment thing some time ago that specifically for how you sell, what kind of seller are you? And mine was literally 50-50 in terms of using my gut and using data. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. And what I mean by that is when you have non-negotiables in your org, I think of organizations and companies as a living, breathing thing, right? It's not just about strategy or playbooks that have worked well before or tactics that you can kind of rinse and repeat, because it's the people at the end of the day that are going to make it or break it. And so when you figure out how do you want to agree and disagree, like across your go-to-market team, right? And I actually like to call it productive disagreement. If you can't reach a point of productive disagreement, then it's a huge red flag, right? And so being able to have fantastic different people who are, kind of in charge of each function, be able to hold each other accountable, disagree in a way that ends in solutions, move forward towards this common goal where everyone can work on their own individual goals, is where like go to market motions end up becoming successful or not. All the rest of it, the actual strategy, the thing you write down, the KPIs, it's just tools as to how you're going to do it. So I think, a non-negotiable really needs to be like, how do you want to do that? How do you want to meet together regularly? How do you want to set goals? How do you want to keep each other accountable? How do you decide to spend time, and how much time do you allow yourselves to kind of get in the weeds, disagree, and then come to an agreement? And then secondly, I think that you just have to decide as leadership in a company, what are the things you're okay with and not okay with? And that's why I talk a lot about this like on purpose stuff. You have to stop and decide on that at some point, and then continue to test about it. And it could come down to like, what are the values in the company or things like that. But I mean, a good example I feel like is, when I was at the last full-time company I was at, we had gotten to this great place of how to disagree with each other without it turning into anything bad. One of our non-negotiables as a team was like how much we care about doing kind of the right things so that we can prevent massive like layoff redundancy motion, later. That's hard to make decisions now for it in case later, but we cared about it a lot. So it was a non-negotiable on how we made some decisions. It's really important that you do that. And then also it's really important on like, what's the kind of level of, I guess, discipline on like how you want to set your goals and build strategy. Some companies spend a lot of time on like an OKR format, certain KPIs, the way you track them. And some leave it a little more squishy. I don't think one or the other is necessarily right or wrong, but everybody has to be on board with it in the same way.
You know what kept going through my mind as you were giving these examples of these non-negotiables is these are so many of the unspoken things that go on and impact so many different areas of an organization, that impact so many areas of a culture and a brand, that if you don't speak them out loud and you don't discuss them at an organizational level, not to mention the leadership level, like all of these invalidated assumptions can kind of blow up in your face and create so many downstream issues. You mentioned the things that everyone talks about, like mission and vision and values, when you think about brand building,
right?
Step one. But to me, these non-negotiables and these other decisions that have to be made sound like they're also very critical importance of authentic brand building. How do all of these non-negotiables tie into the brand building elements of revenue performance? Where do companies get that part wrong? Or maybe this is my assumption that happens, but what are your thoughts on that?
We have to remember at the end of the day, like, be it a small or a really large organization, and the experience that an employee has there is not a secret. Like you said, if we don't say the things out loud, especially the hard things, if we're not honest about when we do make mistakes, not just when we're successful, about things. I think that's the difference between organizations where a person would say, that was one of my favorite places I ever worked at. Like I could say about this one company I've just referenced. That's really the difference. And then of course, there's even worse. That was the worst time of my life, right? Like our jobs affect so much of us personally. Often we think about the phases in our life as like what job we maybe had, what company we were working at, especially in tech, right? Because we don't stay places for 20, 30 years or things like that. So I think people are a little scared, especially founders, and I don't blame them. There's a balance, there's a fine line. But I think when we're being led by people or we're just, we're employees in a company, we just want to feel like I had an idea of what was going on, even if it was not good, like even if it was scary or things weren't rainbows and sunshine, because the last thing we like is that we feel like, one, I don't know what's going on, and two, like they don't give a hoot about me, right? And so we're all in this thing together at a company, no matter what your role is. At least you can be clear about what things are happening. And if you do that, then at least someone can leave that company at some point and just go like, yeah, solid people. It was a tough time, or here's where I ended up or whatever, even if it's not a positive ending. But when you have these other brands where you hear about all the stuff that's just not great, I don't know how to say it, like things that just don't seem super ethical, or the way that their manager treated them, or I got let go. I literally have no idea why, those things, those are just the differences. And you could have just the lack of communication is probably where that happened.
I'm going to take the conversation in a little bit of a left turn, but I think there's a tie to clarity and visibility around business health in general, and that's on forecasting and pipeline health. It's something that you and I talked about quite a bit as something that's usually kind of just treated as a reporting exercise, but we know it's really a critical business health signal. It comes down to the ability to accurately forecast. In your opinion, what does that accurate forecasting process really say about the health of a revenue engine, and how does that impact like downstream communication and clarity around business health in general?
Yeah. So here's another one of those kind of like myths I like to spell out there, where the first time a sales leader becomes a sales leader, which is usually like a regional sales manager type role, they immediately get given this responsibility of, now you need to be able to tell me what your team's going to close by whatever time period. There's no magical switch that happens when you get that job that you know how to do that suddenly. It's just bestowed upon you. I don't know why it's always Fridays too. Slack me your best case commit, and most likely update the CRM, push out those close dates because the board needs it. And that's the culture that just starts happening. What that creates is all you're telling everyone, especially the reps who are the literal foundation of accurate forecasting. I don't care what it is. I just want the dates to reflect accurately. I just care about you faking and pushing around properties so that it looks good versus what's actually going to happen. And so that doesn't teach reps anything about accurately forecasting their own pipelines. And it just trickles up from there, right? And then you've got the CEO who's supposed to be forecasting for the board and all the goals for the year. It's all built off a lie, right? So if you don't first understand that you're going to have now executive leaders who still don't know how to accurately forecast and rely off of this horrible motion that we keep doing, you shouldn't expect anything super accurate here, unless you end up having someone who does know what to do, or you get them the support, or you find a me, right, that comes in and says, here's how you can do this. And it's not an easy change. So it starts with, like I said, it starts with the rep teaching them how to accurately forecast, taking away the, well, board member Bob needs this number, right? They don't care. They don't care about board member Bob needs it, but they do care if they meet their own numbers for the sake of their own personal needs and goals. So teach your reps how accurate forecasting, just their own pipeline, is literally tied to their own success. They should care about it because it helps them. No one cares about Bob. So take that out, right? Teach them how to do it. And then don't just tell them to update it in the CRM because you said so. Show them how, when they're doing it a certain way, again, it helps them. Then you, as sales leader, or your layers of sales leadership, all have the same ability to now use data that comes out of the CRM that will now be more accurate and truthful. The goal is not to forecast in a way that you can try to close revenue that's not reliable and or realistic. And that's the other thing that we get caught up in, is that you're trying to make a number happen versus what is realistically going to happen. So if you're not realistically going to hit the number that you thought you could have or set a goal for, the best thing you can do is proactively say, hey, we're halfway through this quarter. We're not forecasting to hit this. Here's exactly why. Here's what we'll do about trying to make up for it. But if not, we're seeing it now. How do we adjust? That's a healthy business.
Hi there. If you're listening to this show, it means you believe in making a difference in your customers' lives and are looking for tools to grow in your career at the same time. At Integrity Solutions, we're changing the stereotypes about sales training in ways your customers will feel and experience every day. If you want to learn more about how we could help you and your team, go to integritysolutions.com. I like how proactive that approach is. Because one thing you mentioned earlier is that it's never too early for pipeline management. Like, help me operationalize this without totally overcomplicating it. Where does that actually start? Like tactical steps for our sellers in the field.
So I coach founders that are in their founder-led sales journey, right? The very, very early days. And one of the biggest steps for them is to start using a true CRM. Lots of them like to use other things to create one or a good old spreadsheet. And at the end of the day, I always say the best CRM is the one you use. So if it's useful and it's effective, fantastic. Like, that's better than signing up for free HubSpot and never using it. However, if you can start using it in a simple and stage appropriate manner, that will now give you data to learn about your business, right? So it's not that I'm like, oh, well, if you keep track of your potential opportunities in a spreadsheet, you won't close them as effectively. No, but you're losing the ability. The whole RevOps part of me is you want to get data out of the CRM. That's like the whole point of it, besides being the source of truth of like how you interact with your customers. You want to know things as early as you can, whether you're a seller, a founder, whatever. You want to know, like, how long does it typically take when I talk to an inbound lead till they become a deal? How long does it take for my deals to close? Is there a place in my sales process that things stall more than others? What is the effective rate of me closing these things? Like, all that data you'll get automatically if you just use a CRM in a very simple format. But if you keep using your DIY ones or a spreadsheet, you're not going to get that.
Absolutely. And structure really creates that freedom that allows those reps to focus on the right activities that are going to help them achieve their goals.
Exactly.
And then give leadership the correct, accurate visibility. But none of that really matters unless, one thing you mentioned was product market fit. And if you're shooting a shot in the wrong direction, then none of this matters in general. Like, speaking of like having the right data at your fingertips, the third topic that I want to make sure we hit on today is ICP discipline, because I think it's a biggie. It's come up in the last few episodes, and it's come up in a ton of conversations I've been having recently around trying to sell too broadly before going too deep, especially in companies, maybe growth stage or later in their maturity, but wanting to just cast their net so wide and not really being able to validate their idea. And you mentioned that, I think this was your quote, knowing your ICP from day one is critical. Talk me through how folks can help validate that, given that it's so important to get it right out of the job.
It's the most challenging in day one because you have no data.
Yeah, right.
So in my humble opinion, one of the best things you can do is get as specific as possible about who you think that ideal customer is and talk to a lot of them. I mean, like 100 of them, seriously, over a period of time, to see and validate if the problem you think you're solving is in fact a real problem for them. Right. And so there's that whole research part. And if you get enough validation from those conversations that they're just like, yes, I would absolutely want to have that solution in my life. This is what it would do for me, things like that. Great. The second part of validation is, will people actually pay you for that? Right. Or if it's a free account, will they convert into it? And then I think that's actually where people get a little bit sideways, because they start thinking, oh, I've convinced enough people to want to buy this or sign up for this thing. And they think, I've got it. I've got product market fit. Along the way, you need to be constantly auditing and refining the definition of that ideal customer profile even more, because you're still taking some guesses from day one about what it is. And people are really afraid to be wrong and like feel like maybe they've wasted time. So they go more broad. That, and then there's just the fear of like, well, I need to get business, so I'll take kind of anyone who'll say yes to me.
Or sunk cost fallacy. They've already invested in the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's like, it's iterative. It's always, it's living, it's breathing. You have to constantly be validating like, okay, Is there any more specificity on this ICP I can get? And what I mean by that is it's probably not like geographic location or industry or those things. It's the qualitative stuff. It's the way that you change their life if they buy your product or service. It's the place that they're in their life or their business that matters, right? Versus some of those things that I call like you could just go check a box. And so, because that's how you now create messaging that resonates with them, the way you sell, the way you support them as a customer. And so that's where I say, like, your ICP has to be crazy specific, not just, again, the checkmark boxes, but like all the qualitative, psychological kinds of things. Because at the end of the day, people get a little bit, I think, worried about having like a fancy schmancy offering. There was a founder who he mows lawns for a living at the end of the day. Like, if you put it simply, the way he's doing it changes his customers' lives. That's all that matters. They change their day-to-day life by the way that he does what he does. That's a sustainable business. If you're not constantly going back and be like, am I changing your day-to-day in your life in some way? No. Then you'll be a nice to have, right? Or worse, you're not needed at all.
As a marketer too, those psychographic differentiators are so much more interesting and rich and nuanced to tap into than what's your title, what geo are you in, just the checkboxes on some list service that you can find. Like, that's where you can really demonstrate the whole show me, you know me aspect of who you're talking to. And that's how you stand out. It's just a matter of how do you find the folks that are there? That's where you have to really get.
It's hard, but I think like one of the biggest telltale signs truly that you have product market fit is your retention as for customers. You can trick a lot of people into becoming a lead by the way you market to them. You can convince a lot of people to buy what you offer with a certain type of sales process, but you can't fake it once they're a customer. So if you have poor retention, then you don't have product market fit. There's something not right there. It could be the way you're doing it. That is your sure way of knowing you don't have it. I think that's the thing that people get, again, they get overconfident when they start being able to build a lot of pipeline or they have a lot of interest. But if you don't keep the customer, don't scale.
You can't sell one and done solutions forever. You know, we mentioned at the top that you have to know your ICP from day one, but you also have to kind of reevaluate and validate your product market fit every time there's a new launch, because ultimately we got to talk ARR. Like, let's talk about how recurring revenue kind of changes strategic decisions. Like, walk me through your philosophy on that.
You know, when you're in that like 0 to 1, you're just trying to get enough recurring revenue to go, okay, like we have something here, get into 5 million ARR. I mean, just broadly speaking, then it's usually like, okay, product market fit here if you're keeping that ARR in a somewhat relatively healthy way. Getting to 10 mil now means you could build some sort of intentional like engine to keep you there. But once you want to go above that 10 mil and you're going to the 25, 50 mils, like unlikely you're going to do it without knowing how to now land and expand your customer base, because your TAM is only so big and you can only sell your service to so many new customers and keep them. You have to expect churn. You better be building that into your model, right? And you can't just keep selling one customer at a time, hoping they all stay with you. You have to learn how to expand, whether it be adjacent, like kind of market fit things, the current customer and more things you offered them, maybe your pricing model lends to usage, whatever it is. If you can't do that, then you're unlikely going to be continuing that large scale AR growth. But that's also another fantastic sign of, again, like product market fit. Someone doesn't want to just stay with you. They want to give more of their business to you, right? They want you to become a stronger partner. Then there you go. So I see a lot of mistakes sometimes with, instead of focusing on land and expand, it's just do this again in another market. Okay. Or stay in the one you're really good at and figure out how to get more of it, you know, more lasting versions of it.
I have to shift gears into my new favorite segment, which is our rapid fire closer.
All right.
Okay. I don't think you've even seen these prior to today's conversation, but essentially quick instinctual responses. You don't have to elaborate unless you'd really like to, but just shoot from the hip. And then we'll close out with anything you'd like to share or plug with the mental selling listeners for today.
Okay.
All right. Rapid fire question number 1. What is a clear sign that you've nailed your ICP?
Well, I think a lot of people always think like, oh, you're able to build pipeline or people are buying from you or whatever. Or you've reached a certain ARR. I don't care about any of that. Retention.
Love it. What's one habit of revenue leaders who build teams that love their jobs?
You hear about the person more than the numbers.
I love that. So this next one, we are mental selling. So I love this question. What's one mindset shift that transforms sales performance?
I think that it can be really scary and daunting when you hyper focus on the end goals that you have as a seller, right? So it could be your annual quota, it could be your quota for the quarter, whatever it might be. And it can be a little paralyzing. This is where I like backwards engineering. I usually hate it for a lot, like not for forecasting because that's how you get in trouble. But for this type of thing, as long as you can break down what can you handle each day, as long as you're doing your day-to-day stuff or week to week, because some days end up being throwaway days and other days are extra great, then you're good. Do your building blocks and they will end up being the end result. So when you get a goal setting of like, okay, I have to hit whatever it is, $25,000 in MRR this quarter. Great. How do I do it? Make a plan. Great. Now I'm going to throw away the 25K. I don't care about the 25K anymore. I just care about what am I going to do today, tomorrow, and so on and so forth. Because again, like I think it just becomes too daunting and then you worry, oh God, that's so much stuff I'm going to have to do. And like, doesn't matter. Who cares? Deal with what you can control.
All right. This one, bringing it back to Integrity Solutions. What does the term selling with integrity mean to you?
I think a lot of people might go like, oh, just be honest. And it's like, that's kind of a duh. I don't think it's just about being honest with the prospect in terms of like, if you can do something, if you can't do something, all that stuff. Don't oversell, set right expectations. That should be table stakes for any of my sellers personally. Selling with integrity is also about being able to be very honest with yourself, right? And so where we get really caught up and in trouble is when we start trying to force something versus looking at it as, do you deserve to be in my pipeline? Right? Like, am I qualifying you? Because we get really attached to wanting to make everyone say yes, but that's not actually the goal of selling. The goal of selling is, are we a great fit? Can I do a great enough job to explain and show to you, I've just decided and discovered from enough information that you are a fantastic fit for what we do. I will be helpful to you. Let me show you how. And if not, you're not a good fit. I don't want to talk to you anymore. I wish you super well. Here's something I can do to help you, and then goodbye. The goal is to get an answer, not to get yes. So selling with integrity is that mindset versus just being honest with the prospect.
Awesome. Is there anything else, Lindsay, that you want to leave our listeners of mental selling? Anything you want to plug or share before we part ways?
Selling's hard, right? Being a seller, being a career seller, no matter what your role is, like, it's really hard. And so I think also, we're notorious for not taking time off. If we are on vacation, we don't really take the vacation, right? And so that compounds in a negative way. One bad day, 1 week of vacation, all that, like, it's not actually going to negatively affect your end results if you're able to handle really well the days that you are giving your time and attention. And so I really challenge sellers out there to take care of themselves more and stop trying to convince themselves that like they need to be doing XYZ at all times in order to be successful, because it's simply not true. And I can just give the quickest story as to when I'm very thankful I realized this very early in my career. Before I was in tech, I sold cars for 5 years. The culture in automotive selling is you are available to your prospect anytime. Here's my cell phone. Call me, text me, whatever you need. And if you want to come in on my day off, I will come in. Because you're commission only. You don't want to lose your sale. You make not very much money when you sell a single car. And your days off are during the weeks or weekdays. You don't get weekends and holidays, right? I was a very young woman when I started selling cars. And I kind of realized quickly, because there weren't very many of us, I don't think I feel super safe about handing out my cell phone number to strangers. But I also wanted to challenge the idea of it being necessary to be successful. So I didn't. give out my cell phone number after a few months in. And I explained to people, this is my email, and I treat it kind of like text. So I'm very communicative with you here. And I would build enough of a rapport and relationship that people didn't want to come into my day off because they wanted to work with me. Living proof, I was the top rep years and years, and I did not have to give up my cell phone, and I did not have to come in on my days off and all of that, right? So it's scary to think about, but it's possible.
Chills all over. That's such a good example of challenging the norms, sticking to what is right for you, holding true to your boundaries, and just kicking butt because of it. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.